How's it going, everyone? I just got this Minolta X-700 35mm film camera. Now, this camera came out in 1981. It was considered one of the most advanced Minolta manual focus film cameras of the day. And they're top-of-the-line model. However, this camera is plagued by a very famous major problem with two of the capacitors that it used back in the day. Some very cheap capacitor that they stuck in here that just keeps breaking. Pretty much probably all the Minolta you're gonna find on the market, if they haven't had their capacitor serviced, they eventually gonna run into this problem. And so what happens is that capacitor actually powers the shutter mechanism as well as the mirror flip mechanism. And those cheap capacitors, they break, they leak, and they explode as time goes by. And most of the cameras you're gonna find on the market nowadays probably is gonna have some sort of problem with the capacitor. So what most people do when they buy this camera, they immediately take apart the top of the cover and the bottom of the cover. They get a solder gun and they get two brand new Panasonic high quality capacitors, and they remove the old one, they put a new one in. And that's what we're gonna do actually in this video. So at this first part, I want to tell you guys some buying tips when you go out and try to buy this 700, okay? And my advice, whether you should get the 700 or maybe the X570/500, or maybe some of the earlier versions of the Minolta cameras, because this camera, honestly, if you're not good with replacing electronic parts, if you're not good at DIY, I would highly suggest avoid, because that capacitor problem is a huge downside. And also some other problems that I see in this camera, which I paid about $50, $60 locally from a guy. He said it works great the last time he used it. Obviously it's not, like it's plagued by the problems. So tips on buying a used X700, okay? Very first thing, when you go meet up with a guy, make sure you bring a brand new fresh set of LR44 batteries, because you need to test this camera with the battery. This camera will absolutely not run. It would not even fire the shutter if you don't have a battery inside, if you don't have a fully charged battery inside, okay? So two LR44 batteries is what you need if you are buying it locally. The next thing, check internally, open up the camera, check on all the seals. Now this one, the seal is totally worn out. Like there is supposed to be some foam seal here. Now only reminiscent stuff left, it's some sticky glue left here. And so is this area. You can see some reminiscent foams left around those areas. And yeah, it's all gone. So this one definitely had seal problem. So this is one of the area you could probably ask or come down in terms of, offering price, because you're gonna spend another $10 on fresh seals to replace those, as well as the mirror, the flip-up mirror seal right here. If I zoom in here, you can see mine. The foam is pretty much 100% gone. There's no dampening foam over here when the mirror flips up or down. And at this point, I couldn't even flip up the mirror. And also another interesting thing, so this camera, the guy actually ripped off that baffle, the film baffle around the area. So some of the electronic components are actually exposed, which is kind of prone to dusting. But when I got the camera, there's a really weird part here. You guys can see. Like, I don't know what the heck is this. It's just dangling here. I thought it was some electronic parts that he ripped out. But obviously, this is a reminiscent of that film baffle, which you're going to see in a lot of other camera listings, that he didn't rip off, and it just left over here, which is really weird and awkward. It might even show up in the lens, it might show up in the film if it's popping up here and your mirror flips up and light gets in, and it's gonna have a really weird cast. So make sure to check on the film baffle. If it's removed, it's okay. but just make sure there's no weird part sticking out like this. Okay, so this is definitely not right. There's another foam actually on the bottom of the mirror, but now I cannot show you guys because without battery and with a broken capacitor, this camera just would not fire the shutter and flip out the mirror. So that's the most frustrating part if you get a X700. And this problem is going to pop up as long as you don't replace the capacitor inside. That's why it's important to replace that capacitor. Now, another area you want to check is make sure this dial, the ISO dial, is able to turn around. When I first got this dial, it's actually stuck in one place. I had to remove the top. I have to remove the top with some tools and just fiddling around and give it a little bit of lubrication in order for this dial to turn. But that dial was honestly stuck. Make sure all the dials works, the exposure compensation and the power dial. And my power dial is actually still a little bit like sticky. So in the next section, when I remove everything, I'm gonna actually clean up, do a little CLA on all the internal components, give it a little bit of lubrication, make sure everything turns really nicely. And so when I put the new capacitor in here and put everything back together, it should run as close as new, hopefully, okay? Another part you need to look at is this little aperture dial. When I got this camera, this dial is stuck, it's sticky. When I put it here, it doesn't return, okay? So I had to remove this 4 screws and very carefully remove this little piece, which is plastic, by the way. So be really careful when you remove the front part because there's a little spring in here that actually connect to this little thing. You need to make sure you don't damage that spring and put the spring back into place. But I removed everything, I lubricated this little part under here, and now it's moving really nice and smooth. But when I got the camera, it's stuck. It doesn't return to its original position. So that's another area you really need to look at, as well as this little depth of field preview thing. I know if it gets stuck or if it doesn't work properly, it actually prevents the camera from firing properly as well. So make sure all the buttons work. This release button works. You can see a little clicker right here. Make sure it works and it doesn't get sticky. And make sure the lens is in good condition. Now, when I bought this camera, I was really dumb. I didn't bring a lens clean cloth and I didn't really properly clean the lens on the spot. And when I get back, I saw there was actually a freaking like scratch right on the back element and 2 big scratches in the front, as you guys can see. So those are actual scratches on the glass element. Luckily, there is no fungus in the lens, and the lens itself is actually fairly clean. But you can see that back scratch there very clearly, right? It's very obvious, like right here, this giant scratch on the back. And if I show you guys the front, you're probably gonna see it. See that giant scratch right there and giant scratch right here. It shouldn't show up in the lens very obviously, but this is something you need to take a look and bring a clean cloth to make sure you very properly clean the lens, to make sure the lens is actually in proper clean condition with no scratch, and also very, very important, most important, no fungus and haze inside, okay? This one, Aperture blade, works perfectly fine, and this is a fairly new MD lens, but not the fastest one. This is f2, okay, not f1.7 or the f1.4. Which both are slightly faster. So those are definitely the basic areas you need to check when you get the camera. Now, the very first telltale that the camera is not going to work properly is if you put a fresh set of batteries in here and you turn on the power. I'll show you guys. And the first telltale, which is the area that you can probably cut down the price on when you go and try to negotiate, is you hear that little beep. Not sure if it'll catch it. That beep comes up for only 0.5 seconds and then it just disappears. That's the classic sign that the capacitor went bad, okay? So if you put the shutter to on and beeping mode, which is flipping the lever all the way to the left side. If you flip the lever to the right, it's just on, it doesn't beep when it turns on the meter. But if you flip to the left, It turns on the meter and it beeps. Now you heard that 0.5 second beep, hopefully, and nothing happens. If you look inside the viewfinder, see, be able to show you guys, probably not, that the light doesn't turn on either. It's a classic telltale that the capacitor is broken, okay? When the capacitor is broken, you won't be able to advance the lever and you won't be able to file the shutter release, okay? So this camera by itself is not worth more than $50. So if people are asking you for way more than that and they have a non-functioning piece, don't pay more than $50 for it. Hopefully you can get it home and spend about $10 to get a couple capacitors, some proper tools, and so the total cost of getting tools and the capacitor I would say is around $20 to $30. Get the capacitor replaced and get a new light seals, $7 to $8. So in total, you shouldn't spend more than $120 to $130 to get this camera back into proper working condition. And that's probably what the camera is worth, at least to me. It shouldn't be worth more than $150 for a X700 because this camera is very prone to all kinds of electronic problems. It may be the best camera back then, but nowadays, year 2021, when you get this camera, it's for sure gonna run into problems. So in my honest opinion, I probably wouldn't even picked up this camera. I would have probably picked up some older cameras that featured aperture priority only and had a more reliable system and only had one capacitor that doesn't break, which was a higher capacity, which was a higher quality capacitor. This camera by itself, at this current stage, it's not even worth $60 if you don't know how to fix those cameras, okay? Very frustrating because it's gonna take me, another week or two to get it up and running. But this is one kind of frustrating experience I want to share with anybody that wants to buy a Minolta X-700. Is the electronics is very unreliable because of that two capacitors and because of the amount of time that you're gonna spend fixing the capacitor and maybe some other problems, okay? Hope you found this video helpful. I'm sorry it's a little long, kind of a rant, but in the next series of the video, I am gonna be taking apart the top and the bottom plate. We're gonna be replacing the capacitor and bring this camera back into full working order. And then we can shoot some films and then feel good about, the whole 35mm film shooting experience, okay? So thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video where I'm gonna be replacing the capacitors.